I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world, and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the soleil set. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. The Negro speaks of rivers. Big up, Langston Hughes. All right. So we at this again. This is Convo with Zuri G. I am Zuri G, aka Peter Johansson OCC. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, ni hao, buenos dias, buenos noches, heseche, akwaba, welcoming. What up, though? So, yes, it is another convo. This is actually the first convo. It's with brother Steve. And it is actually a convo that's a continuation from a preceding series of convos and talks on YouTube channel Cafe Mélanger, and this is the actual first joint that was actually intended as part of the Cafe Mélanger, but in the decision of making this podcast, this kind of gets transitioned into being the initial podcast. So it is shared in this sequence at this moment. We talk about Brother Steve's spiritual path into what he is at this moment, which is a Catholic chaplain advisor for university students at the local university here, Case Western Reserve University. He talks about his spiritual path, his ethnic heritage, and his continual awakening in this life. It's comparatively briefer than the previous joint, and we continue on with this joint. So I have yet to hear it in a while, so I'm about to listen to it and give a wrap up at the end of this recording. So with that said, we continue on with the convo. Lightweight in progress, as I recall. One love, peace.
Anchor you're using?
It is.
Yeah, I used that for a while myself.
You do?
Yes.
All right, cool. This is my first time using it. Like somebody just told me about it like a week ago, this past week. Let's see. I'm trying to think. If I do this, then that's going to be a little bit of a different angle.
Yeah, and wouldn't pick up our voices if we did it that far down.
Yeah. So we might just have to deal with the shaky cam with my hands.
Let's see. Maybe if we can.
No, I would prefer if you would actually hold it, and then and you focus on yourself, because you're the interest in this combo. So if you get a little bit of me and just whatever, cool. But if I'm not to put you out or not,
it's all good. I can do this.
All right, cool, nice. All right, so I'll give you a little bit of an intro of like what this is all about.
Okay.
So, I'm a spiritual diplomat. I do kumbaya. I've been doing it for nearly decades at this point, many years, and some of what I do is like sharing thoughts, and I've recorded these through the years, and primarily video-wise. And so amidst this, I've done a few series of like convos with friends talking about spirituality, friends from different religious traditions, and then also friends who are mixed, and just talking about spiritual experience as being a mixed person, because what I find is that many mixed people tend to have a rather hesitancy or resistance towards organized religion, because there's a certain amount of judgmentalism, condemnation about the parenting or the parentage, and so there's a certain distrust towards organized religion. So it's just kind of like very secular. So I try to like be proactive in broaching that subject to like talk about spirituality, because it's a legitimate and necessary experience within everybody's life, regardless of what that spirituality is. And so I've actually presented at conferences in the past, actually the Critical Mixed Race Studies Conference, and on this topic of mixed identity and spiritual experience. So that being said, I've done these recordings on the video and uploading them on YouTube, and I'm actually doing a series at the moment. But now, like I mentioned, I'm working on a podcast, and actually this is the inaugural episode. Now, to be honest, I'm actually thinking about like uploading some previous conversations that have been video recorded and then doing that as a podcast. But this is like the first official proper.
First one recorded with audio only.
So that being said, what I thought I would say is like just how like we met, and then kind of talk about you, what your experience is, and I'm welcome to talk about myself, but I do that a lot already. So I'm interested in hearing what your experience is, and just kind of like chop it up from there.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Now, in the previous series that I've done in the Convo, I've had like set questions that people had it beforehand to like prepare a thought. You know, I didn't do it this time.
Just flying by the seat of my pants.
So this is kind of like open ended and just so we'll see how it goes. So, and here we go. Train of thought.
You said you wanted to start by talking about how we met, right?
Right. So just a few meters of
here.
Yeah,
not too far away.
I was sitting on the steps, and I say hi to people, and you walk by, you're like, "Yo, what's up?"
Yeah.
So we just started convo. We probably talked for like half an hour.
Probably about an hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of like you said, chopping it up.
Yeah. So it was a beautiful conversation. And you're like, hey, by the way, I work up at the Newman Campus Ministries, and I'm like, oh, wow, okay, cool. Yeah. So, hey, I do interfaith. All right, nice. So, then we just like see each other. So that's about it, like a year ago, a little bit less than a year.
Probably at the beginning of this like academic year. Yeah.
So, anyways, we've kind of like chopped it up, and you mentioned being mixed yourself. So we haven't talked specifically about that experience with you, and so I have a modest knowledge about what the details are. I mean, you talk a little bit about your family history and background, but what I would like to do in this convo is invite you to talk about your ancestors.
Yeah.
And begin from there, and how you come to be in this earth.
Yes. Yeah. So to begin there, I guess on the most basic level, I have ancestry from a number of different places, but I get an African American, Native American ancestry from my father's side, and mostly a European ancestry from my mother's side. My mom she has a lot of Irish and Italian and a little bit of German. My dad has ancestry from Rwanda and Burundi. Wow. But on that side of the family, we think that our ancestors came over in pre-Civil War. Okay. So we don't really have much track of where they all came from for the most part, other than that little bit that we know about. Like I said, from like the Watutsi tribe of that area in Africa. Wow. So I have a very African side of a very African American side of my family and a very Caucasian side of my family. And I grew up. My parents were actually divorced for most of my life, but I grew up mostly with my mom, so kind of around more kind of within the Caucasian culture, within the European culture. Would probably be a better way of saying that. But then I did get to spend a fair amount of time with my dad and with his side of the family, and just experiencing African American culture and from the inside.
Cool, nice. All right, so now when you mentioned having ancestry specifically from Rwanda and Burundi, that's rather specific in the experience of African people typically on this continent. Particularly, I don't know if what you describe as your migration, or that migration of your ancestors, including the Middle Passage or through other means, but usually African brethren on this land just have a general awareness of coming from Africa without being too specific. Now, recently, there's the DNA testing and association with tribal affiliation additionally. So, but my question is, how do you, what informs you about the Rwanda and Burundi background? Specifically.
So you mean how do I know about that? Yeah. So honestly, I remember I was probably around 15 or 16, and it was the first time that I asked my grandmother, my dad's mom, kind of about our like where our ancestry comes from, and she didn't get super specific with me about how she knew it, but she said with confidence that that's where her mom's parents came from.
Beautiful.
And where her dad's parents came from. And so, yeah, that's really as far as it goes. Was just that my grandma knew, so now I know.
Sure. So 15 years old, you say?
Something like that.
All right,
Somewhere
cool.
around there.
So that's comparatively young still. I
Mhm.
mean, and when you're learning about yourself, I mean, your adolescence and
Mhm.
kind of like finding your place and kind of learning about what ethnicity is, what politics are, and those elements. And so it's a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
I'm glad that you have that affirmation, particularly generationally,
Mhm.
that informs you and guides you as you progress at that stage of life and continually.
Mhm.
So. And then obviously honoring your Irish and your Italian and
German.
ancestry as well. I imagine your mother has like that has been shared from generation to generation.
Yeah, I would say probably the most that comes down is probably the Italian from her dad's side, and then the Irish from her mom's side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at what point in your life do you become like aware of that heritage, like conscientious of it, of not just being some kind of amorphic thing, but like I'm part of something, like I'm a continuation of something.
Mm-hmm. I think that's still part of a journey that I'm on in a way, because
Okay.
I think that I very much like I said, growing up with my mom and kind of more like within like that European family and that European heritage, I should say, that European heritage family, and kind of within that a European heritage environment. I think that I was always one of the few people of color amongst the people that I grew up with.
Okay.
And so I think that I always sort of had that sense of being distinct in a way from the group that I was, from the people that I would hang out with, but only had very few experiences of that being a negative. But I would say that as far as like what that means in terms of like of who I am culturally and kind of how my heritage informs like, or how I'm a part of a larger story in terms of my culture, I think that's not something that I've considered to a great deal. I think that that's something that it's interesting, because I think I do consider that to a large extent with the religion that I practice being part of a larger story, but less so as part of like an ethnic cultural sort of perspective.
So when in your family household when you're growing up, are there any I'm definitely planning to like talk about the religious
Mhm.
experience as well. So I'm getting to that
Yeah.
too. So I don't want to because I know it's significant.
Mm-hmm.
But in your household experience growing up, were there any like customs during the holidays or certain ways of doing observances that were distinctly Irish or distinctly Deutsch or
Mhm.
Italiano or African or anything? Were there any kind of things that kind of that like reinforced or informed you of your cultural experience in that respect?
Mm-hmm. I would say definitely got an experience of food culture in
Okay.
that way. It was funny because, like I said, it was on my mom's side, it was my grandfather who was Italian and my grandmother who was Irish, mostly. But I think that probably early on in their relationship, my grandmother made it a priority to be able to cook Italian food for my
Sure.
grandfather, and so there's a recipe that still belongs to our family, just like a simple spaghetti or it's spaghetti and meatballs, but it's just a wonderful recipe that
Sure.
it just always tastes like home every time I try it.
Yeah.
And then my dad was honestly, he was maybe the best cook I've ever met. He worked in restaurants just about his whole life, so we learned a lot of chef techniques just from osmosis and just from asking folks about how to prepare certain foods. But he always had that soul food background.
Okay.
So like he'd prepare things that was typical, like the collard greens and a number of other things. But he would take these soul food recipes and he would make them with this brilliant knowledge that he had of how to do certain cooking techniques. And so yeah, that's I think that the food culture is probably the biggest thing where my cultural identity sort of shone through.
Okay.
But I would say that in terms of like holiday observances or anything like that, I think that I never really experienced anything that really that was greatly distinguished my the way that my family would practice Christmas or Thanksgiving or anything like that in a way that's beyond like the food choices we would have.
Sure.
In a way that was really set us apart from like the wider American culture.
Okay. Cool. So now I follow a question on that. Um, when are your parents? How did your mother
Hmm.
receive your father's cooking, and how did your father receive your mother's cooking? To your recollection.
To my recollection, so that's actually a hard question to answer because they were
No?
like I said, they were
Okay.
divorced for most of my life.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, and so I think even when I was young, so like my first memories are my parents were already split up at that point.
Okay.
But I do remember, like, even, because in the immediate aftermath of that, there's obviously a little bit of tension between the mother and the father, even
Sure.
if there is still a lot of love there.
Yeah.
But I would say I do remember that my mom never said anything negative about my dad's cooking.
Okay.
And I think that my it was funny though, because my dad, as good of a cook as he was, he didn't enjoy the process of cooking. So I imagine that when they were together, when they were in the same house, it's probably my mom who was cooking more often than him.
Yeah. All right. So I asked that for a specific reason, also because when I'm listening to you, I'm like, yo, it's ringing true from my experience as well. So,
Mhm.
so I'll give you some background. Like my father also is predominantly of African ancestry,
Mhm.
but also mixed with Native, Israeli, and Irish ancestry as well. My mom is like straight up Scandinavian,
Mhm.
Swedish and Irish, Swedish and Danish.
Danish.
And so she was actually born in India. Her parents were missionaries,
Mhm.
so that's another story. But that's her background and the background that they come from. And so they come from very distinct backgrounds.
Mhm.
But me here in the Cuyahoga area in the 70s, when it was kind of like that hippie kind of thing, where they weren't hippies, but it was just like that vibe
Yeah.
of like meeting people who are different than oneself.
Mhm.
So they also bring to the table different cuisines and different and cultures. And so my mother, having been born and raised in India in a certain very religious environment, when her family moves to the United States, like the Americas is a different place for her. It's a culture shock.
Mhm.
So she gets acclimated to the cuisine, and so she would do the American stuff like spaghetti and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So that's what I remember her cooking. I remember a lot of Hamburger Helper and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
I had a lot of that growing up myself. Yeah.
So then that's what like all my friends would be having. So and I grew up kind of like in a predominantly Eurocentric kind of environment as
Mhm.
well. At least my early stages of schooling. And so it just like what everybody else was having, so we didn't think about it too
Mhm.
much. Then like on occasion, my father would cook as well. He wouldn't cook too often.
Mhm.
He was working a lot, but he would cook. And he could cook too.
Mhm.
Now, then when you mentioned like your father cooking, it reminded me like when my father cooked, like he wouldn't eat. Like he would cook, and afterwards he's like, I'm not hungry anymore.
Mhm.
So I'm like, what are you talking about? You just did all this. So, but one of the things I remember him cooking distinctly, he would come back from work, and then he would, when you mentioned the collard greens, it reminds me of neck bones. And he would put neck bones, and get a pot and make some neck bones.
Mhm.
And I remember it has a very distinctive smell,
Mhm.
very distinctive aroma. And we wouldn't have that normally. And so we would already have our dinner by the time he would get home. He would get home kind of late.
Mhm.
And so he'd have his pot of neck bones, and I'm like, I wasn't hungry. We already had dinner, but I'm like, what's that? What are you eating? And he's like, no, you don't want to eat this.
Mhm.
And I was like, why not? He's like, I'm like, okay. And so like the first time, second time, but every time he cooked, he's like, no, you don't want to eat this.
Mhm.
And it was interesting to me. It was like, why he would say that, why he would respond to that, because
Mhm.
this was like the soul food and like the cultural thing. Like, no, you're in that little
That's interesting.
that Eurocentric kind of
Mhm.
private school kind of environment. You ain't ready for this kind
Mhm.
of stuff, because this got a different kind of kick to it.
Mhm.
And it did have a distinct flavor. So I'm like, okay, I'll take your word for it. But
Mhm.
it just reminded me of that, like the distinction
Mhm.
of cultures, and that's why I asked about
Yeah.
how your mother and father respond to the cooking.
Mhm.
I actually wrote a song about that many years later, about like the neck bones and
Mhm.
like what's actually being conveyed in that experience of
Mhm.
life, where he comes from, the kind of challenges he had growing up, and additionally now
Mhm.
he wants to abstain from passing all of that on to the next generation, but
Mhm.
still continuing the continuity of the culture and heritage and tradition.
Yeah,
So
that's one of the interesting things I think about sort of the generation before us and our generation. I think, and maybe even the generation before, like 2 generations before us, because I think that
are
there
you a
was.
millennial?
I technically am, I believe
Okay,
so. I'm.
we're technically intergenerational,
Yeah.
because I'm an X-Gen.
Yeah.
So okay.
But so as I'm thinking about, like, there was such a as people were just beginning to really like, as people were still like immigrating and stuff like that, like there was such a, it just reminds me that there was such a push amongst people like to like parents wouldn't teach their children like their own proper language, or like they
Right,
wouldn't
exactly.
they would try to avoid passing along that culture so that they'd be able to assimilate. Now
Yeah.
it's like as our generation is becoming parents, we're like
searching for it.
exactly
Yeah.
we're trying to kind of find that cultural identity,
Yeah.
trying to find those roots. And I think I kind of got caught in that mix. Like my dad, he was very social justice oriented, especially in terms of racial justice. I remember he would try to communicate to me very clearly that as it was that like even if African Americans had equal rights in terms of the law, we didn't have equal rights in terms of practice. And he would try to make that clear to me, and it was something I didn't understand at the time.
It's complicated.
It is complicated,
Yeah.
but it was. But I think that there was a lot of his upbringing that he didn't pass along to me,
Yeah.
kind of for those similar reasons. It's just like, yeah.
And what I've come to learn, I'm still, like you said, I'm still in the process of discovery, because that's the nature of life, and we're honest about it. And so I'm still learning about that. But one of the things I recognize is like in the culture, particularly when we're talking about coming from an experience of affliction, a culture of a heritage of oppression, enslavement additionally, there's a lot of anger. And so we want to honor our ancestors, honor the legacy that we come from, and continue to strive in honoring that legacy, but also being careful of how much we lend ourselves to that anger and that hatred that is often connected with that. Even within the food industry, because we know a lot of the soul food comes from an experience of affliction, the leftovers, the scraps that are left over, and it's a miraculous thing that what we're able to do, what our ancestors are able to do, and like make it tasty and like make it now it's a delicacy in their gourmet restaurants that are set up based upon scraps.
The
legacy is scraps. How about that? But simultaneously, like we have to be careful of the additional negative elements that are coming. And I think that's what my father was trying to like be mindful of, because he knows like the additional elements that are around that experience as well. So I think that nicely kind of like segues into the notion of how we deal with that angst, with the anger, the hostility, the hatred, but also the listlessness, the sense of purposelessness, wandering in this life of like what is this all about, and finding our spirituality, finding like our purpose, our calling, our relationship with God, however people respectively understand and believe that, and something that goes beyond our ethnic experience, beyond our culture, beyond like the earthly experience, to like connect with
what's
the
beyond.
eternal. So now I'm interested in hearing what your story of faith, your religious story of how you come into your faith and how that evolves through the course of your life.
Yeah. So I grew up sort of in definitely a Christian household. We were a praying household, but not a church going one.
Okay.
So like I said, I grew up with my mother. My dad was not a particularly religious man. I believe that I think on some level he had some belief in God, some belief in was beyond. And I remember when I was very young, he would pray with me a little bit. But I remember as I started to get older and started to take my faith more seriously, which we'll get into that I guess in a little bit.
Okay.
But I remember as I was starting to get really involved in a church for the first time, the one thing he said to me about it was, "Don't become a fanatic," sort of thing. So that was sort of his posture toward religion.
Okay.
But so, like I said, I grew up in a non-denominational Christian family, and I grew up kind of by osmosis learning to pray that way and learning to, and just kind of developing an understanding of the fact that there was a God who loved me, and that wanted a relationship with me, and that there was an importance for me to kind of reach toward that relationship as well. But it was a child's faith. It was just kind of very simple as it should be at that age. But I remember I was fairly young when my sister, who was a very, very strong Christian,
Older or younger?
Older.
Okay.
Older. She's about 6 years older.
Okay.
I don't remember what it was even that she said, but she said something to me when I was maybe even just like 8, 9, 10 years old that just made kind of everything click with me in terms of like how important my religion was supposed to be in my life, how important it is to be connected with the Father and to be connected with Christ and the Spirit. And so for a while, I took my faith. I took my faith very seriously. And I was pretty young.
At 9 and 10 years old.
9 and 10 years old, yeah.
Cool. Nice.
But and so as I was young when I first kind of started to take faith seriously, I was also very young when I first started to question faith very seriously. I was maybe 12 or 13 years old when I remember what happened was I read the definition of God in the dictionary, and it read something along the lines of, like, in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, God is the creator of the universe. And I think that was my first real concrete, like, it was a moment when it was my first real concrete encounter or being aware of the idea of religious plurality in the world and how many different belief systems there are. And in that moment, I'm like, why the heck do I believe what I believe? Or like, what is there that gives any more credence to what I believe versus what any other person believes? And so when in my younger teenage years, I did not believe much of anything at all. But even through that time, I still maintained a prayer life, even though I didn't know if anything was hearing me or if anyone was hearing me or if someone was, who or what it was. And I think that, but I would still pray because my religion had mattered to me so much. It was something that if there was a real something beyond me, I didn't want to lose touch with it. And so I think that I was 15 when a couple of friends of mine invited me to like a prayer group, like a Bible study at a Catholic church for the first time. It was the first time in my life ever.
What type of school? What type of high school did you go to?
Public school, yeah. Right. Yep. Actually, right, not too far away from here in Cleveland. I was Brecksville.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah. But so a couple of those friends, they just invited me to like a Bible study at their church, and I think at that time, because I had maintained that prayer life, I was ready to start asking those questions a lot more concretely again. Okay. And
were you asking this to yourself, or were you asking this to
within my own heart, within my, and just within kind of my own
preliminary convo.
Exactly. And I felt immediately connected with that community.
Okay.
And then from that connection with the community, over time, I came to believe all that they believed in a way. It seemed to me that there was a lot of the things that I had kind of just doubted on principle. There was actually really good reasoning for, really good explanation for, and then over time, I realized that there was nothing that separated me in terms of my belief from that community. And at that point, when I was 18, I decided to formally convert, and I was baptized and confirmed and became part of the Catholic Church.
Wow, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So now, there's a lot in that process. And when you talk about, like, maybe, I don't want to utilize the term backsliding or regression, but that's often utilized in religious communities in terms of, like, religious practice, where you talk about being somewhat distant from your initial enthusiasm within your prayer life at your middle teenage years. So that's the stage of life where often we're kind of like enveloped in like fitting in and like fighting about the world and society, our place in it, and trying to like find an identity and like a walk amongst everyone else. And also that's a time when we're very susceptible to popular culture and a lot of secularism as well. And so do you find that to be part of the experience that influences that kind of distancing from your initial enthusiasm and religious practice?
I would say to some extent, yes, but I would say that for the most part, it wasn't sort of an ephemeral pressure from outside that made me kind of question my faith in a way. I think for me it was a lot more of an intellectual thing. It was just it was a lot more just like it. For those couple of years, it didn't make sense to me why I had particular beliefs when there were so many things out there.
A lot of things unanswered.
Yeah.
And that was going to be my follow-up question, because you said when you make the decision to convert to Catholicism, that you use the word specifically reason and rationale or something like that. You started receiving those answers.
Yes.
But it wasn't just kind of like believe this and now I feel nice about the belief, but like it was making sense to you. Like you could see like the rationale between proclamation and in the experience and in the practice.
Yes.
And so I know a lot of people, I know that's my experience.
Yeah. The way that I articulate it is that God found a way to my heart through my mind.
Aha, right. Nice, beautiful. Beautiful. So um, and my inclination is like just like give my experience in response, but I want to be mindful of our time because I can go on and on about that. And there are a couple of things I want to cover in the convo as we have moments still. So then you formally convert into Catholicism at the age of 18. This is, I presume, the time when you're graduating from high school, getting ready for university.
Yep.
So when you did that affect your decision of which university you attend?
It absolutely did. Yeah. Okay. So it was about a month after I had committed to the process of entering into the Catholic Church that I was applying for colleges, and so I figured I should apply to a couple of good Catholic schools because there's a lot of good ones out there. And I got into what, in my opinion, is the best one out there.
Watch out now.
Got into the University of Notre Dame. And,
I was going to say, for you to say that, it's probably going to be Notre Dame. But yeah, all right.
And I just, that was, I never would have thought of it before.
And you know I'm an alumnus of Georgetown.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
No, you know that. I told you that before.
You did tell me that.
So
you did tell me that before.
Snarky.
But that is also a very good Catholic school, but it's not the best one.
No,
I'm playing with you, man.
Okay. That's all right. No, I haven't watched sports recently, so I can't like go to basketball or anything else. But that's okay. It's a friendly rivalry.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a beautiful thing, regardless. So you had a beautiful experience at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I don't think I would have been happier or grown more anywhere else in those 4 years.
Okay, cool. And you majored in I think you said sociology or
I actually began by studying psychology, but I ended up just graduating with a degree in theology.
Okay, just in theology.
Yeah. So I did not finish my psychology degree. I got about 2/3 of the way through, and then realized I didn't have enough passion for learning psychology to really make a career in it. But I had an abundance of passion for studying theology, and I figured what I enjoyed learning was going to be what I enjoyed doing.
Sure.
And so that's what I learned.
And I remember you mentioned going to grad school
yes.
afterwards. Okay.
I was also at University of Notre Dame, too.
Okay, double.
Double domer is what we call them.
Double domer?
Double domer, when you got 2 degrees from Notre Dame.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Right, I appreciate that. So now I'll just give this little disclaimer, to be honest. Like I mentioned, I graduated from Georgetown. That's where I went to law school. And so I had a different undergrad experience, which is interesting. So I went to an HBCU. You know what HBCU is?
I do not. I was just about to ask.
You are at a university. An HBCU is a historical college.
Gotcha.
So the university.
I've never heard that abbreviation before.
Yeah. So now you do.
Yeah.
Now
I know.
So that's what I went to. I went to HBCU called Hampton University. It's in the Cherokee Land in Virginia, southwest corner of Virginia. Beautiful experience there. Very distinct though. Very unique experience as well. And I actually had my first kind of formal religious experience on that campus my freshman year. That's another story though. But I went here for middle school. Middle school, my graduate school after Hampton. And then I went to Georgetown after this.
For law school?
For law school. And so now, to be honest, like my intention with law school, my guidance was just to go to like a top law school. And so I applied to all the top ones. Georgetown's the one that accepted me. So I'm like, I guess that's where I'm going.
It's a great law school.
So it is. It's a fantastic law school. And so I'm like, all right, I got it. All right, let me do that. So now I was oblivious Jesuit, Catholic. I just know Georgetown. Oh, yeah, it's okay. John Thompson, Patrick Ewing, that's what I knew. And I had visited there actually when I was on my college tour in high school, and I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going here. So I'm glad that I was able to go to the law center. But anyways, now that being said, the reason why I say this is because it's during my experience at Georgetown, particularly after my experience at Georgetown, when I started like my spiritual journey, become increasingly knowledgeable about religion and spirituality, that I began to increasingly appreciate the fact that I went to a Jesuit Catholic university, and like what that means and what that enabled me to do in terms of my personal life. Because I wasn't studying American law when I was in law school. I was studying pretty much anything but that. But anyway, that's another conversation. But I had to say something in advocacy for my alma mater.
Absolutely.
Now, what 2 things I want to ask you as we kind of focus on wrapping up the combo.
Okay.
So how we're doing our time. So. All right.
Take another 5-10 minutes.
Cool. So the first question is, as you progress along this spiritual path, your religious experience, your religious commitment to God and to the church, and as you continue to become increasingly aware of your ethnic background and how that kind of confluences with your religiosity and your religious teachings. You are in a position of don't know if the appropriate word is chaplaincy at the moment, but guidance for young people at this moment. And so, two questions is: the first one is, as you are at this moment, your state of awareness about who you are as a person of mixed ancestry, and what does it mean to you at this moment, and particularly, like, what are the lessons that you receive? Like, what do you learn from that experience from being mixed? Like, what are some of, like, the takeaways, or like the things that you appreciate that are like that you find unique or special within your mixed experience that informs you in your walk in life?
Informs me in my walk in life.
Yeah,
I would say that I think that it is a privilege to be able to kind of be a part of two and more communities. I don't think that I say two because I don't necessarily feel very connected to my Native American heritage.
Okay.
But I think that there
do you know a specific tribe at all?
A little bit of Cherokee and a little bit of Choctaw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I think that there is a richness that comes from being able to kind of have had more than one experience of culture growing up. Because I think that what that enables me to do, and what that capacitates me to do in a particularly profound way, is to recognize that there are multiple ways that people grow up. There are multiple kind of multiple influences that form people as they're coming of age, and then understanding that I might understand some of them from the inside, I might understand some of them from the outside, some of them I might not understand at all. But at the same time, having kind of seen African American culture from the inside, having seen European American culture from the inside, I can, when I'm walking with somebody or when I'm encountering somebody, and especially if there is a subject on which we disagree, even if profoundly, I'm able to understand, like, to basically assume best intentions, and to assume and to recognize that I come with my own biases. To not assume that my biases are any more valid than the next person's, and that, I think, enables me to build relationships with people who I'm not like. That enables me to talk with people who I deeply disagree with, and have loving conversations, and have, like, conversations that are the objective that both I and my interlocutor has is to articulate our point, and to better the other person's understanding of our point, to come to better understanding of their point. I think that, so I guess this is a long-winded way of saying, I think that having multiple backgrounds enables you just to have a sense of what it means to come from a background.
Well, so as I'm listening to you, and that's very, I think, is well said. I think it's insightful, and I think it's beneficial for people to hear that. And there's a lot of rich experience and learning and wisdom that exists within that awareness and that articulation. So I appreciate that. It is appreciated. And as I'm listening to you speak, I'm thinking about my follow-up question, and I got a part 2 to the follow-up question.
Okay, so we got question 2 and question 2.5.
Yeah. So the official follow-up question is, in your position of chaplaincy and in providing guidance, how do you utilize that lesson, that wisdom of being mixed, and bringing in your religiosity as well when you're providing consultation or counseling to young people today, the students that you work with today? How does that, like, influence the advice you provide? Yeah,
so I think that one thing that I've come to realize, I mean, when you're part of a religion that is as just, like, population-wise big as a Catholic Church, that there is a large diversity of perspectives that exist within that.
Okay.
And a lot of what you'll find is that you'll have people who are grounded in one perspective, on any number of issues. People who are grounded in one way of looking at a question, and people who are grounded in another way of looking at a question, and thinking that it's really in terms of a right and wrong answer. From the role of a minister, the role of a chaplain, that's a really dangerous posture to have, because you can find yourself either isolating somebody from the community because they don't view a specific issue the same way you do, or forming somebody not to draw them closer to Christ, but draw them closer to your own vision of what it means to be living as a Catholic. Neither of which is beneficial for them, and neither of which is within what you're meant to be doing as a minister. But so I think that they really do kind of like this really flows from what I just expressed to you, that my having grown up with two different backgrounds with parents who actually were part of two different political parties is that I think that enables me to again kind of approach conversations recognizing the wisdom and the foundation of what comes from the students who I work with, and to really discern if I hear something that doesn't register well with me, to really discern if that's just me that it doesn't register well with, or if there is something that is not in accord with what we believe as Catholics, or not in accord with something, not in accord with what is actually true. And of course, that is just because I have that perspective doesn't mean that my assessment is always right on that. But it gives me sort of a little bit more of a disposition to be open to considering the fact that maybe this is just the way that I'm looking at it, and I don't need to correct that.
Yeah. So when, before I get to the question 2.5,
so we're at question 2.25, or
no. 5 is just like the halfway between 2 and 3, and there's no 3. But I will say this: when I'm listening to you, when you talk about that perspective, I'm reminded of a teaching or a phrase that W.E.B. Du Bois writes in his Souls of Black Folk. Are you familiar with the book? Okay.
I'm not familiar with the book, but I'm familiar with the writer.
Okay, yeah. So it's like his seminal work that he wrote over a century ago. It was kind of like his coming out kind of thing onto the global scene, and so he writes about the unique experience about. I mean, he's mixed effectively, even though it wasn't like a pronounced kind of thing or identity a century ago, and there's a whole lot of like. A lot of suppression or repression about like that type of recognition of having dual or multiple ancestry or multiple heritage. But anyways, the Lionhead he talks about is it being a peculiar experience, double consciousness of always seeing oneself through the eyes of another. And so when you talk about having that awareness of like you might have something that you believe in that you believe in and somebody does something that you disagree with, but still being able to like recognize, okay, there's what is actual truth, and then what is like the propensity for pluralism and having a difference of opinion, and being able to just have that awareness, because I think so many people are maintained and are trained to have just like blinders and just like this is it, no question about it, this is it. But a lot of mixed people talk about having that kind of perspective of the multiplicity of understandings, and that's what Du Bois writes about in his book. So that I'm reminded about it as I'm listening to you talk about that. So the follow-up question, or the follow-up point 2 point whatever, is I'm also listening to you, and when you talk about Jesus and when you talk about the teachings that Jesus provides in the gospel, in the Bible, it occurs to me, just in your estimation at this moment, or in your whatever occurs to you, like what are some of the teachings that come to mind at the moment that Jesus provides that speak to your mixed experience? Because we know, like, I'll be honest, like when I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about Jesus always talks about compassion, empathy, being able to identify with those who are different, those who are down to the Samaritan, the one who is of the same blood, and the one who actually does the work. And so it's always the stranger. I'm not going to be answering the question, but that's what I'm thinking about when I'm listening to you talk. And I want to delve further into the religious experience. Like, what are the teachings that come to mind that Jesus provides that speaks to your experience? Yeah,
I would say that you mentioned the welcoming the stranger, and I think that's part of just the DNA of what it means to be a mixed person, because to be a mixed person is to be the result of one man and one woman welcoming somebody from a different culture. So I think that's something that kind of speaks to my experience as a mixed person. But I also, as you were kind of naming a number of stories, one story that also comes to mind for me is when Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman at the well. And I think that this is something that is where he teaches by, in this case, a lot of times he just teaches by words, right? But in this case, he teaches more by action than he does by words, because not only is she a person of a different and almost like between Israeli Jews and Samaritan Jews from in that time. Like they were not just different cultures; they were hostile cultures. Like they were not necessarily violently hostile, but
At odds.
they were at odds, right? If what the Samaritans believed was true, then what the Jews believed was not, and so there was that hostility. And so I think that what Jesus models in that moment is not only sort of as he's encountering this stranger and as he's speaking with this woman, which is in a way it contrasts his own culture. I think that what we see in that is that St. Paul actually elaborates on it in one of his letters that in Christ there is no Gentile or Jew, there is no woman or man, there is no servant or free. That he doesn't distinguish us in that way. Even if he recognizes that these distinctions exist, they don't matter to Christ, and because they don't matter to Christ is in terms of what a person's value is or who belongs as a part of him, then they shouldn't matter to us. It shouldn't matter to the church. It shouldn't matter to humanity. And I think that that's sort of modeled in his encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well, and the way that he loves her in that moment and inspires her to just go proclaim who he is. So I'd say that's what comes to mind for me.
Beautiful. I appreciate that. And if I recall correctly, that's the one who he tells her basically all of her life.
Yep.
And so that she's amazed and says, "Hey, look what this dude is doing. He
Yeah.
knows me and I don't even know who he is."
Yeah.
All right. So
That's the one.
we got time for a follow-up on that, or you want to wrap up?
I would say
Yeah.
if we could wrap up. Yeah, I wish we could, but
So beautiful. Thank you. Anything else you want? Anything come to mind? Anything else you want to
no, I'd
share
say
at the moment?
no, I'd say I appreciate the opportunity to tell a bit of my story, and I wish we would have had a little bit more time to hear some of yours. But
Maybe we'll have another time.
Exactly.
God willing.
For sure.
So cool. Well, I appreciate you stopping by and sharing some insight. It's very valuable, very rich, and it's beneficial to have that perspective. And thank you for the generosity.
Awesome. I really enjoyed being a part of the conversation.
Cool. I'm glad.
Awesome, sir. Switch around here. Shake hand.
Cheers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry about that there.
You're fine.
All right. So, that window. That was, like I said, that was one of the first joints, and it was outside. It was a warm day about a month ago or so. So we headed outside and got some of that wind there. Well, first of all, and the wind picked up in very interesting portions of the conversation. For the record, HBCU, that is an acronym that stands for Historically Black College or University. That's the alma mater that I graduated from, the undergrad university I graduated from, Hampton University. And towards the end, we were talking about one of the passages of the Gospels when, like we said, Jesus talks with a woman from Samaria that is amazed by him being able to tell her about herself, and I think it speaks for itself through the description that Brother Steve shares amidst all the wind and everything else. So that being said, all that accounted for, I myself thought it was an interesting conversation. But however, that's me about it. What would be helpful and beneficial is to hear what other people consider about it, particularly in terms of the respect or in terms of the religiosity of the conversation. How ready are people generally for that type of combo? And given the kind of culture of mixed people globally, particularly in this Western Hemisphere too, how receptive are people towards that type of conversation about spirituality? Let's see. Right. This is the joint where we say, yo, food on the table, shelter over the head, clothes on the back, these kind of things. Have yet to set it up. Again, the crowdfunding is on hiatus at this point. We're actually focusing on another option, another methodology, which is village to village exchange, trade kind of arrangement, particularly given current circumstances and economic challenges at the moment, but also economic challenges that are anticipated for the next year, and thus focusing on exchanges with villages from other lands that have products that are necessary, and offering the products and services that we have available to do bartering, trade, exchange in an increasingly cooperative way. So this is something we've been working on for many years, and it was something we've been doing for a number of years. But we're looking at something doing it increasingly direct and sustainable. So rather than pursuing kind of conventional methods for things that are less certain, we're increasing our emphasis and effort in the cooperative economics in pursuit or endeavor. So that being said, we can use rice, we can use beans, we can use flour. Well, at the moment, not for the next week or so, because here at Asona Ashram, where I live, we observe Pesach, and that means no leaven, basically no flour products, no wheat. But anyways, I mentioned, I think before, we are working on a purchase or a shopping list to put on the website to make that available. I have yet to get to that either, so I guess don't need things too tough at the moment. We do receive contributions actually within the past month and within the past week, actually, generous contributions of gift cards, food items, and additionally, and so that is helpful. And we actually have already a list of the contributions that we receive, and working on how to present that so that people have an awareness of what we do receive, and what we are held accountable towards utilizing in a productive way, because that's part of the nature. And I can also we provide tithes for this as well, about 10% of the contributions. So for all the food products, and additionally that we receive, we also forward at least 10% of that to other places that have the necessity. So that's part of our policy, part of the ethics, part of the ancient tradition and wisdom and guidance of righteousness, but even just well-being, if we're going to be honest about it. So the paperwork have yet to get too tough, because things is busy here. So anybody interested in co-oping on that too, we got lots of things on our to-do list. So that's about it. We have some additional convos that are queued for the next few weeks, as well as some additional convos that are being scheduled. Actually, in the past week, I posted a number of poetry, some original poetry, on an individual basis on this podcast, and I intend to remove those for the most part, except for one, because one, it's a little bit convoluted on the list. I mean, it might seem nice now at the beginning of this podcast when we only have one or two convos up, to have those poems to be interspersed amongst the convos, but in terms of getting a sense of what's actually on this podcast and a flow, it seems beneficial just to focus on the convos. I do intend to keep the storytelling component that I have up there, and I shared a couple of stories with the intention of doing that on a upasada basis, on the full moon and new moon. And poetry, I'm actually planning to continue doing, post all the ones that I did already, and additionally on the a YouTube channel, probably my personal YouTube channel, and also I am on a hiatus in terms of creative writing, in terms of poetry, for the most part. So that's another story. But my point is to say that with the podcast, keeping it increasingly streamlined, because even just in utilizing the Anchor platform, having an individual poem for each episode, it stacks up the archives, and I'm uncertain. There seems to be a limit on the memory and storage. And in addition, just again, like it's very I don't want to say cluttered per se, but there's a lot on there. So as the recordings of the convos increase, it seems beneficial just to keep it to focused on that primarily. So the individual poems I intend to keep on the personal YouTube channel. Wow, that was a long time of saying pretty much what I said in the first 10 seconds, but this is the nature. Oh yeah, that also reminds me of a critique about the combos. Yeah, talk fast, I do at sometimes, and a little bit perhaps energized or eager, perhaps is one way of describing it. A little bit of the stuttering, some pauses. The wind again was somewhat bothersome. Perhaps working on structure, perhaps working on some prepared questions beforehand. Oh, and that reminds me the original format in terms of like the list, the top 5 list or the top 3 list. In subsequent conversations, and actually in the first conversation with elder brother Robert, it was a little bit awkward, a little bit forced, and so that is as the convos continue, God willing, there's a consideration of just being increasingly kind of comfortable and organic in terms of the nature of the conversation, rather than necessarily doing a top 3 or top 5 list. I think that's a generational thing. I think younger generations are accustomed to like the top 3 and the top 5, so it's helpful to relate to, because there's one particular convo that I have that's forthcoming with Brother Xavier, where there's ready recognition of like the top 5 list scenario, and we build a convo around that. But particularly when talking with elders, it seems to be less of a frame of reference. So it tends to be somewhat forced to kind of like be a stickler about those things. And that actually was what led the previous conversation with Brother Robert to be so long, because I was fixated on fulfilling that stated intention. So all that to say, less concerned about sticking to that as a fast rule. Perhaps as a guideline thereabouts. So anyways, that's part of it. I also said I was thinking something else about the style of conversation. Yeah, sometimes I talk about myself, and that's part of the nature of these joints. So there's a certain amount of leeway for that. Yeah. There's something else, but maybe that'll get covered in another day. So the website is convowithzurigi.wordpress.com. All right. So I'm actually in the process of reaching out to other mixed podcasts, and perhaps YouTubers as well, and with the consideration of establishing a collective that supports each other, that communicates with each other, and that pools together efforts and communication and awareness, and additionally in our respective pursuits. So I'm still working on kind of like the focus and the purpose, the objective of that, as I reach out to other podcasters, or is that what people are called? I'm uncertain. Podcast makers, content creators, whatever it's called, who are doing similar type stuff. And again, the premise is, or the shared kind of commonality is that people who have mixed heritage, but also considering people who emphasize world citizenship and similar experiences and ideologies of reconciliation and cooperation amongst people who are different from each other. Interfaith is part of that as well. So I guess that's it in terms of the notes session. So we can call that a wrap. Thank you. Oh, that's one thing I don't do enough. I noticed that. I don't say thank you enough. So for cats who are listening to this, appreciation. And thanks. Suggestions are welcome. Cats who are interested in convoing it up. To be honest, I would be less convinced myself at this point and at this stage. But I have high expectations, or I have high standards. You may not be able to tell, but it's there. Wow, that's a lot of self-deprecation. That's late, and I'm rambling. So one way to stop that is by saying Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom, Zaijian, Adios, Te Chakaris, Esempe na Asamugo, Kele Ufed. One love and peace.